It's true. Across the globe, women aren't as prosperous as men. Gender inequality is a pressing moral issue, but we forget it has massive economic implications. If you were to put all of the women who don't have access to formal financial services in one place, they would make up the third largest country in the world. That means an entire population without bank accounts, credit cards, or other tools you and I likely benefit from daily. Prosperity for women starts with inclusive policies, products, and people around the globe, and the investment to make it happen. Welcome to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast. My name is Sonia Kelly, and I lead Women's World Banking's proprietary research division. Join me as I speak with changemakers around the globe to deconstruct the social and economic exclusion women face. We'll discover new evidence together and drive action to accelerate women's economic empowerment. Because a leg up isn't a handout, it's a global game changer. Indeed. Welcome, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, now streaming on YouTube and available wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on YouTube, you'll be able to find additional insights and resources linked in the description of the video below. I'm the host of the show, Sonia Kelly, and I'm the global head of the Women's World Banking Institute. Before we get started, I'd like to give a special shout out to the sponsors of the Making Finance Work for Women podcast. First, EY, Ernst & Young LLP, is a global leader working across assurance, consulting, law, strategy, tax, and transactions. EY teams ask better questions to find new answers for the complex issues facing our world today. You can visit ey.com to explore their latest insights and services. And second, listeners like you are another one of our sponsors. We're so grateful for the support that's come in for the podcast. If you haven't yet become a sponsor, you can do so on the Women's World Banking website. Now let's jump into the show. Today is a special episode to celebrate mothers. I've talked about my own mother on the show. She's a listener. And many of our guests have talked about their mothers as well as their inspiration. Mother's Day is coming up this weekend for me in the U.S. I know it's a different day across other jurisdictions, other geographies, but we're going to be celebrating it today on the podcast. Now, we haven't, however, spent much time on understanding women who are mothers across the markets we've been focused on and the role of finance meeting mothers' needs. Now, I personally am a mother, and so much of my own perspective coming into this episode comes from my experience. And here's the thing about financial services. I often talk with financial institutions who are proud to say like they don't see gender or they're gender neutral. But I really, as a consumer, I want companies to be aware of the unique challenges that I face as a mother. Right now, my kids are asking, for example, for an ATM card. My 9-year-old asked for an ATM card so that she can have easy access to her bank account when she goes to pay for things. I've been making her count out change when she pays for things just to teach her about money, and now she's asking for that. And as a mother, I really want to be able to respond in a thoughtful way. My financial services institutions can help me to do that. Funny enough, financial services that are built with women and mothers in mind tend to work for more people. They tend to work for men and people who aren't mothers. Let's take the challenges of being a working mother, for example. In Indonesia, one of the number one most active times for women e-commerce entrepreneurs is late at night. This is because after women put their kids to bed, they might go online and sell a few things. Women are choosing flexible employment so that they can balance their responsibilities. I feel this so much myself as I record this podcast episode from my home office on a day when my kids are at school. And tonight, I'll probably be answering emails from my phone after the kids go to bed once my colleagues in India wake up. This is why I loved seeing a report from the financial services provider PayJoy recently. PayJoy just launched this really cool report on working mothers in Mexico. It found that digital connectivity was an employment lifeline for women, and smartphones are so essential to enable credit access, like women being able to get financial services directly from their phone, and digital connectivity as well. And what's interesting about that report too is that they didn't just show that digital connectivity and access to a mobile device was a lifeline for women accessing finance. It also showed that it's like a reinforcing relationship between finance and internet connectivity. You might actually need finance in order to get the phone in the first place. With that, I'd like to introduce our guest from PayJoy. Lucia Villar is the SVP of Product Management at PayJoy, where she leads global efforts to combat fraud while expanding access to responsible credit for underserved communities. She brings deep experience in fintech, product innovation, and financial inclusion, from leading digital transformation at JP Morgan Chase to impact investing at Community Investment Management and launching her career in microfinance with Accion. Now she's based in Mexico City, and she's not only a bold voice in inclusive product design, but also a working mother herself, navigating how to build technology that works for real families. We're so excited to have her on the podcast. Welcome, Lucia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here, and especially for the Mother's Day episode.
Yeah, and I can't believe you and I haven't met before. It's such a pleasure to be able to engage with you, because we are alums of the same organization. So it's just so wonderful to be able to chat with you from your role now at PayJoy. I'd love to first hear a little bit about your origin story. What led you to join PayJoy and focus on digital credit and smartphone finance?
Yeah. So really, I spent my whole career focused on this idea that access to fair financial services is a powerful tool to improve people's lives. So I've done that my whole career. I started out in microfinance at Accion, where we both were, just hanging out in rural Latin America, seeing firsthand how access to small amounts of capital could really power entrepreneurship. After spending some time in consulting, I then joined a startup to help make student loans more affordable to recent grads. I invested in mission-driven fintech startups, and then most recently I was at Chase, where I was focused on launching new alternative lending products, helping customers pay for their purchases over time in a way that was more manageable and helped fit their budget. So it's always been something I've been passionate about, and I really feel all that has led me to PayJoy.
One theme I see across your career is thinking about the actual needs that people have. I mean, you started about talking about entrepreneurship. You also talked about like money management needs and the people's payments needing to fit where the money comes in their lives. And now you're working on smartphone financing. There are tremendous numbers of barriers for women, especially in emerging markets. And when we're thinking about finance in the context of women's needs, we have to be thinking about invisible labor, unpaid domestic work. I talked about nap times in Indonesia and bedtimes and how that's driving financial needs as well, and people's need to interact with their technology and their finances in ways that make sense to them. I noticed in your report on Mexico's working mothers that there were some interesting stats about micro entrepreneurs. 90% said access to smartphone financing made them feel financially secure. Can you tell me a little bit more about how phones change women's economic potential and how you think about that at PayJoy?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. Our research definitely shines light on some of the most overlooked but economically powerful groups, right, which are women and particularly also working mothers, right, who are about a third of PayJoy customers. So you mentioned some stats from the study. I'll give you a couple more. 95% of mothers working outside the home said smartphone access really enabled them to maintain their jobs. And 94% of them who work from home said that the phones help them manage their remote work, right? So I think as you think of women, they're not just caregivers, they're also these economic engines, and at the same time juggling informal work, managing the household, caregiving all at once. and they have little structural support outside of the formal economy. So the smartphone is really, especially when financed through PayJoy, is really the first formal financial product that they have. It opens the door to gig work, mobile payments. As you said, some of them are entrepreneurs, right? So they'll have time to sell online, participate in digital marketplaces, which they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. I think the other interesting thing is it begins credit history. It allows them to form a credit history, right? And so a third of the working mothers we surveyed got their very first phone through PayJoy. And then 55% of them reported increased income. So that as a result, it's really transformative.
Wow, that's great. You mentioned smartphones, and we have to talk about the difference between smartphones and feature phones, because there's a persistent smartphone gender gap across the world of 13%, meaning women are 13% less likely than men to own a smartphone. So when you said for a third of the working moms that you surveyed, it was their first phone that they received with financing for PayJoy, that's not a surprise to me, because there are so many women in the world who don't have a smartphone. You work specifically on smartphones. It's like a big thing that you enabling. How are you closing that smartphone gender gap? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And I'd say, so the 13% global smartphone gender gap, it's a structural barrier to women's participation in the digital and financial economy, right? So, and then when you look at emerging markets, which is where PayJoy mostly operates, the gap is probably even wider than 13%. So to answer your question, I think at PayJoy, some of the ways that we're helping to close the gap. So in Mexico, we found 46% of our customers are women. And of those, 75% are mothers with at least one child under 18. I mentioned many of them are gaining access to their first smartphone, first credit product simultaneously, right? So we're really thinking about designing products that reflect women's real world conditions, right? So irregular income, informal work, lack of a banking history, right? And so really the idea is to focus on helping women cross into the digital economy on their own terms in a way that works for them. Our pricing and approval processes don't penalize women simply because they fall outside of the traditional banking lens. I can tell you also a story of one of our customers that I met recently. She had just landed her dream job at this really fancy department store here in Mexico, and she needed a phone. But the job didn't start for another month. And she really wanted that job. She didn't want to have to take something else, just to make ends meet. She needed some financial flexibility, in her own words, just to get by. So it's just an example of how our products and the flexibility they provide really have this huge impact in people's lives.
And now a word from our sponsor. EY applauds Women's World Banking's 45-year legacy empowering women through financial inclusion. Together, we have a common vision to build a better financial services industry, one that is stronger, fairer, and more sustainable. Find out more on ey.com. And you just talked about employment impact. We've also talked about entrepreneurial impact. There was also a study during COVID, actually, in 2021, GSMA, that's the Global Mobile Association that all of the mobile network operators are a part of, did this study where they looked at the gender gap in smartphone access, and they saw that it was decreasing at that time in 2021. So they went and did qualitative research to support their understanding of that finding. They found it was because women were getting phones because they had to connect their kids to their schools. And so it was like the mother's responsibility to figure out how to manage remote schooling. So she would go out and get a phone or find one from a relative and put a SIM card in it so that she could help her kids to learn. There are like all of these benefits of having a smartphone. And I think you're absolutely right that persistent gender gap is a structural barrier to women's engagement in the economy, but also to women's engagement in the lives of their children. So I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
I want to probe your business model a little bit. You are a person who has worked in financial inclusion for most of your career. You're a person who has focused on issues across the last years related to over indebtedness, to consumer protection, to all of these things we talk about when we talk about people first entering the formal financial system. Like, how are we going to make sure that we're not putting them in a position where they are at risk? And so, tell me a little bit about PayJoy's model. How do you ensure that services are expanding credit access and avoiding debt traps?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Digital credit can cut both ways, right? So it can empower, but it can also entrap people if it's not designed responsibly. And certainly that's something I've been studying my whole career. So at PayJoy, I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about how to design consumer finance to work for underserved populations. So just a couple examples, and this is why I was so excited to join PayJoy. The loans are fixed term, they're transparent, and interest free. So there's no late fees, no compounding penalties. I think most importantly, the customers can return their phone at any time and walk away with no further obligation, right? So that's how we avoid
Wow.
debt trap.
Huh.
And it's really a big departure from some of the more predatory models that exist in the market today that really can entrap people. We also have, I think, the phone locking technology. So it allows us to provide access to credit to more people. It temporarily restricts the smartphone functionality after missed payments, and it encourages
Oh.
repayments in a way that's not harsh, but it's not harsh as something like repossession or blacklisting that we see a lot of other players out there doing.
Hmm.
And then I think finally, we really do use a graduation model, right? So customers start small, shorter term loans, and they build a repayment history with us. And that helps them unlock lower costs, longer term products. And the approach also, works both ways because it results in higher repayment rates and stronger customer loyalty, which I think is also exciting.
Hmm. And what strikes me about you talking about the ways that you're kind of building in safeguards against over indebtedness, what strikes me is that for you as a company, those are also things that benefit you. So, like the phone locking technology is something that keeps you from having to hire somebody to go knock on the door of a borrower and say, "Please give me back your phone," which would cost PayJoy a lot, and all companies that have these costs pass the cost along to their customer. So that's also something that probably helps you keep the cost of the loan down, I'm sure. And so this is just to say, from
Yes.
an operator, what I'm hearing is consumer protection can also be good for the company too, and like good for the business case as well. Maybe I did have a follow-up question, which is, one research does show that consumer protection efforts actually like increase the stickiness of a product and increase trust as well. So it's not just like cost savings for you as a company. It means people are going to come back and get another loan, and people are going to see the PayJoy brand and say, "Oh, I had a good experience with them." So I wonder how you're communicating the great protocols you just mentioned, like the fixed terms, the phone locking, and the credit scoring, like all of these things. Like, how are you communicating this to customers, and what are you seeing in response? Like, are you getting anything back?
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, consumer protection is really a competitive advantage and a growth strategy, right? And I think especially important when serving women. So we're extremely intentional about how we communicate our terms. They're very clear. There's no jargon. We use the right reading level, et cetera, right? And that really helps us build trust. And trust is our currency. And the community and happiness that we've built in our customers is really a testament to that. Let's say 92% of our customers in Mexico told us that smartphone financing helped them maintain their job or business. 90% of them reported having greater financial security. And our net promoter score in Mexico can get up to 80.
Oh,
So
wow.
compared to financial services average of 46. So I think that transparency, that trust that we've built is really such a driver of that experience and satisfaction.
Hmm. And for those who are listening, net promoter scores means the likelihood of a customer to refer a friend or a neighbor or somebody else to the
Yeah.
service. So 80 is very high. It means like 80% of customers are recommending PayJoy to a friend.
Yes, and it causes them to come back to us, many times and recommend us to others, right? And so that's a big source of growth for us as well.
Yeah. And fun fact, women are more likely than men to recommend products to a friend that they like. So for our listeners, take that take that how you will and use it how you want to. But serving women customers is a really good bet for word of mouth marketing. Now, I was on your website today, Lucia, and I scrolled through. One thing I often do when I talk to guests on the podcast is I look at their website and I see like what photos they have on their website, whether they have like all men or whether they have men and women. And I was really pleased to see that the first 3 photos on the website, like as I scroll down, are all women in different parts of the world, showing like the diversity of women, which I love. Now, at Women's World Banking, we often say that when you design with women in mind, you design for everyone. And this really calls into question the notion that like gender neutral is the best way to design a product. You've talked about engaging with women specifically and even gone like a step further to say women working mothers, women entrepreneurs. Tell me a little bit about how you think about gender when it comes to creditworthiness and providing loans.
Yeah. I mean, we think it's really important not to ignore the real differences in how women access and use financial products, right, versus men. So, at PayJoy, we don't ask for gender in our credit scoring. That's an important thing to us, but we're also really intentional about how the product design includes women. So, for example, many women in emerging markets don't have formal income documentation, but they're still highly reliable repayers. So, as we underwrite or think about underwriting loans, we use non-traditional data, usage behavior, insights that we get at point of sale, predictive AI. We use these things to evaluate creditworthiness, taking into account, the situation of many women. We also, I mentioned earlier, we never penalize someone for exiting the loan, so you can return the phone at any time. That really allows them, gives them control over their financial commitments. And it's especially critical for women who have more volatile incomes and caregiving duties, right? So they're more likely to have that volatility impact them. And I think, overall, when you design for women in mind, with women in mind, you end up building better, more inclusive products for everyone. And I think PayJoy has certainly recognized that and brings that through to the products we bring to market.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, for example, you mentioned the flexibility, like being able to return the phone if you want to. That's something that would probably be attractive to a woman who's trying to balance many upcoming expenses and thinking like, okay, well, if somebody gets sick, I can return the phone and I won't have to keep paying. But that's something that's really useful for everyone.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when you design for women, you design for everyone, which is important. Lucia, it's been such a pleasure to have you on. I wonder, do you have like one last word of advice to our listeners as somebody who's been in this financial inclusion space? Just putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, no. I think the word of advice is going to be open-minded. I've seen throughout my career such an evolution in how financial services work and how we underwrite customers and how we use data. And so just knowing that the world can change, and I think that has led to more inclusive outcomes, more customization for different for different segments, including women. And so this field will always amaze us. So be ready for the ride would be my advice.
That's great. Be open, be ready for the ride. It's good advice for all of us. Thank you so much, Lucia. I appreciate it. I have a lot of good notes from our conversation as usual. I'll share a couple with you. One is working mothers are a third of PayJoy's customers, which I think is really remarkable when you think about finance not being important in and of itself. Like I don't wake up in the morning saying, gosh, I can't wait to use my financial services. When you think instead about finance as a tool for something in somebody's life, something like finance for smartphones can make a big difference to someone. I do wake up saying, gosh, I need to grab my phone because I forgot to message somebody. And so finance enables people to do that. access to financial services is an accelerator of entrepreneurship too. Lucia and I talked throughout our conversations about many different examples of women using financial tools on their phones and engaging in their businesses as well at times that make sense to them. And digital connectivity really allows that. Access to financial services really allows that as well. So those were just a couple examples I have in my notes, as well as the net promoter score bit, like just that people are very likely to recommend a financial service to a friend if they have a good experience with it. Now, I'm going to put the link to PayJoy's recent research called "Unlocking Economic Mobility" in the resources below the YouTube video here, so you can click on that, and I would encourage you to read it. And as we wrap up this episode, I would encourage us all to just take a moment to reflect and maybe reach out to someone who's played a nurturing role in our lives, whether it's our mother or a mentor or a friend who's always had our backs. And if today is tender for you, if this was a hard episode for you to listen to, I'm holding space for that too. And actually, I'm going to give my mother a call right now. I'm going to call her on speakerphone. I've talked about her on the podcast before. I've talked about how she is a listener too, so you'll get to meet her as well.
Hi.
Hi, Mom. We're just wrapping up the recording of the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, and I was thinking about you and about your work as an entrepreneur and a business owner, and I wanted to hear your voice.
Oh, it's great to hear from you. Thanks for calling.
And happy Mother's Day to you.
Oh, happy Mother's Day to you too.
Thanks, Mom. I'd love to have you close out our show if you wouldn't mind. I just texted you a script earlier this morning.
I got it. So here's what I need to tell everybody. Found today's discussion valuable. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share with your friends or colleagues. You can also leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback matters, and it helps my daughter and Women's World Banking bring you content that resonates. We'd all like to stay engaged and informed. I'll be listening to the next episode alongside you.
Thanks so much, Mom. Thanks as well to our guest today from PayJoy and to our listeners for joining us. Looking forward to the next one too.